Hi. Okay, so this is Roseanne here, and today I am interviewing Sandy Blaine. So, hi, Sandy.
Hi, Roseanne.
How you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty all right. So I'm just going to tell people about you, Sandy. So Sandy Blaine is a preventative health consultant. She's a health and wellness writer and a yoga instructor. She's a prolific writer, so she's written magazine articles and 2 books, including Yoga for Computer Users and Yoga for Healthy Knees, and both with Rodmell Press. She lives in the Bay Area of California, and she's been teaching yoga for over 15 years. And she's the co-founder and co-director of the Alameda Yoga Station. She's a core faculty member of the Berkeley Yoga Room's Advanced Studies program, and long-time in-house yoga instructor for Pixar Animation Studios. We're going to talk a little bit more about that too. So I've known Sandy for several years now. Through social media, and I don't even actually remember how we initially connected, but somehow through It's All Yoga Baby, we connected, and we were Twitter friends for a while. And Sandy came to Montreal 2 years ago, and she's also a enthusiastic student of the French language, and we hung out here in La Belle Ville and met up in person. So, and she's just as charming and enjoyable in real life as her online persona is too. So it's a huge pleasure today to talk with Sandy Blaine in person, as we call it. So Sandy, just to start off with, I'm just going to jump into it and just ask you some questions about your yoga practice and your teaching. So when did you start practicing yoga?
Well, hearing you list my bio credits, I realize I have to update it because I've actually been teaching for about 20 years now.
Okay.
To update that, and I started teaching. I've been practicing for about 6 years, which in retrospect was very soon to start teaching. But so I started practicing, I think, around 1986, 1987. And,
how did people discover yoga in the 80s?
Well, yes, how did they? You know, the Bay Area tends to be ahead of the curve on that particular type of thing. You know, the more things that would be considered fringy activities elsewhere.
Yeah.
So it was already starting to sort of boom here just a little bit when I found it. But I started because a friend stumbled into a class, and then she wanted to drag me to it. And I was very resistant. I'm like, oh, it sounds really stupid. Boring. And it was, a while before she convinced me to go, and then immediately I fell in love with it. Like, first class, never stopped. Yeah.
Okay, great. And how long have you...
It wasn't stupid or boring.
Okay, so you got over your initial resistance. I think that the stupid and boring thing is like a really common initial impression of yoga, especially probably in the 80s too. But even now, people still have that prejudgment of the practice.
Absolutely, and especially back then, you're right. I had this idea of it as, kind of lying around and stretching and breathing, which I have to say sounds really great to me now at 52 in a way that it didn't at 26,
Yeah.
But the class I went to was sort of a Iyengar class, but it was a little more eclectic than that, and it was very challenging. So it wasn't at all my preconceived notion of it either.
Yeah. So how have things changed over the past 26 years since you first discovered it, and what trends and movements have you seen in the yoga world and in your practice and in your community?
Well, it has changed a lot. The mainstreaming of yoga has had pros and cons for sure. I feel a lot like your colleague Carol Horton, who talks about she probably never would have found it if it hadn't been mainstreamed like that, and I feel that also. My way into a deeper yoga practice was the physical practice and the fun around that and the social life around that, and and then gradually feeling a deeper connection and wanting to know more. And so I don't have a lot of judgment about how people come to the practice, and even if what they want out of it is health and wellness, that's great. That's fantastic. It's enough. But there are problems associated with yoga workout culture and lack of information. You know, people don't really know necessarily what they're getting into when they go to their first class. It's kind of random because they call it all yoga, but yoga means so many different things, and there's just not a lot of, I think, consumer education when you get started.
Yeah.
So that's an issue. And when it's a yoga workout type of class, whether that's at the gym or whether it's at a big commercial studio that has 80 people in the class and you're all pounding through vinyasas, there are of course risks of injury to that. I don't feel that comfortable with the media that blames yoga for those injuries because they're more, in my view, like marketplace injuries.
Yeah.
It's not, and it's hard to distinguish. What are different types of yoga, but an athletic activity that's always going to have risks associated with it.
Yeah.
But it's not yoga overall.
Right. So it's not yoga's fault if people get injured. It's a lot more complex than that, right? Like it's I think it's the culture of the class, and it's the culture of yoga, and it's misinformation perhaps, and
all of those things, and individual tendencies, individual inclinations toward some people have a much harder time holding back. Many people do not learn to hold back or to be more judicious in their practice until they've suffered some ramifications. Other people understand that more easily right away. So there's some individuality involved in it. But yes, it is very much, you put it really well, it's very much more complex than that.
So, Sandy, what would you say is the purpose of practice?
The purpose of practice, that's such a big question, isn't it? I honestly feel that there's just no one-size-fits-all yoga. I think that's one of the things about it. It can be anything from exercise regimen to a path toward meditative life and, enlightenment, however you want to look at that. And there's a whole range of stops in between. Self-inquiry is one, just learning to listen to your inner voice and get to know yourself a little better. I think that's kind of the bridge between those two ends of the spectrum. It can also be therapeutic. It can be used as physical therapy to a certain extent. And I think one of the reasons it's so appealing in our modern culture is it does offer the possibility of multitasking. That you can be doing a number of those things at one time. But I read recently that the thing that makes it yoga and not just exercise is the mindfulness aspect of it, and I think that's true. I think that if you're just going through the exercises and you're not trying to listen inside, then that's something a little bit different. And recently in some of the recent conversations on your blog and other blogs about various issues in the yoga culture, several people have made the point of, are all these things really yoga? And some of these things are maybe not yoga. They're yoga influenced or yoga based exercise, that kind of thing. It would be nice if they had a different name, just to make that distinction. To be able, for those of us who feel strongly about the integrity of yoga, to be able to set those boundaries and for ourselves and realize that, they don't necessarily apply to this larger community where yoga's become so many different things.
Yeah, it seems the opposite's actually happening, where yoga is kind of being applied to things. I mean, like laptops. There's a laptop called yoga, and asana yogurt and stuff. So it's like the opposite is happening, and the bound. Not that anybody would ever think about a laptop is yoga, but it's like just how the word is being appropriated and the connotations that it has, and how it's kind of being stuck onto things like like Pilates, which is a fine discipline.
Yeah.
In itself, like it's it's really powerful and really healing and beneficial and stuff. But then you get these kind of like yoga laddies and yoga Pilates hybrids and stuff, and just really fusing the word because it's so kind of marketable and of the moment right now. So you were really vocal.
You have that phrase from I think the late 70s, commodify your dissent.
Yeah.
I don't think we ever could have foreseen when I started doing yoga in the 80s just how commodified it could become, to the point where, foods are being named after it.
Yeah, and just completely other practices. So you were really vocal during the yoga injuries conversation that kind of started up at the beginning of 2012 and kind of carried on throughout most of the year, actually. And so how can the current yoga marketplace be a safer space for everyone?
That's a really good question, and I wonder if it can be a safer space for everyone. You know, there just has to be some kind of consumer education. Um, and I don't know, there's such a tension between that and the marketplace and the drive to make money on it. So, you know, when you have a sweaty, vigorous yoga workout going on in a gym or a large studio where there's, you know, 80 people in a class and they're all just trying to follow along with the teacher, you know, that is just, it is a recipe for injury. And, you know, is it in the commercial financial interest of the studio to say, hey, you know, it's really better if you start slow and learn a little at a time and don't join this type of class until you know what you're doing? I mean, who's going to do the educating there? And personally, I feel that all the different types of yoga, the styles of yoga, from Iyengar to Ashtanga, Vinyasa, all of them have their pros and cons. They all have benefits. They all have things that you have to be careful of or that maybe aren't ideal. If it were up to me, we'd all be practicing a variety of styles, I think, to find balance. I tend to have a more eclectic practice myself. I do enjoy flow classes. I think that can be a really joyous practice. But I think that in and of itself, it's not enough. It's not enough. And if people just throw themselves into that with no knowledge, I think that also is a recipe for injury. And it's not a particularly safe way to practice. Now, if people are in it for the workout, the yoga workout, great. You know, you take the same risks that you do with anything else, you know. It's you know, if you run or you ski or, you know, you might possibly get injured. It's the same kind of thing. But that type of yoga doesn't have the same therapeutic benefits as a slower, more mindful, sort of more therapeutic approach, right? The more consciously therapeutic approach to yoga. They're two different animals, and it's got to be the consumer education. And I want to say that I think personality type has something to do with it also. I mean, there comes with the current marketplace and lack of education, but we're drawn to the things that seem most natural and most natural fit. So more Rajasic, you know, type A personality is going to be drawn to those sort of, I think it was Charlotte Bell called it the fast and furious styles of yoga. You know, certain people are going to be drawn to those styles of yoga, and that combination of that type of personality and that type of practice and the lack of education or information, you know, obviously that is going to be a higher risk activity. And those people would benefit from a slower approach, an introduction to yoga class. I always say it's better if you're going to be jumping around from pose to pose, it's better that you learn where you want to be when you land before you start doing that. But, you know, on the other hand, for people who tend to be more lethargic or tamasic, you know, a lot of sun salutations really might just be just the thing to get the energy moving. So ideally, we'd all be doing a combination and looking for balance, and you start where you are. But if you really want to develop your practice, you're going to add on to that.
Since you're based in the Bay Area and so close to Silicon Valley, you've been connected to the high-tech world, and you've been teaching in that environment for 20 years, which is a really long time before corporate wellness initiatives have become, you know, mainstream and commonplace. So what have you seen in this environment, and what has changed over the past 20 years?
Well, I was kind of a pioneer in that, which is great because I feel like I've been a contributing person to bringing a more wellness consciousness into the world of business, not just high tech, but just in general. You know, one thing that has changed is more of that wellness consciousness and the expectation that there's more to being at the workplace, that there's things that we can do for self-care throughout the day, that those things aren't completely separate, which I think is very positive. You know, I have a long relationship with Pixar in particular, and I feel having been able to offer wellness in support of the great art they produce there has been a really amazing thing for me. I love being connected to that process and seeing the artist's work and feeling that I have something of value to offer, even though I'm not an artist myself. I have worked at in other high-tech companies as well, and just the rise of technology in general has health impacts, right? It takes a physical toll and a mental toll on us as a society and as individuals. There, I mean, even on you and me, right? I would think with my job, I wouldn't be so plugged in and computer bound, but those things definitely affect me too, and I find it harder to unplug, and I notice the toll that takes on my body, which is one reason that I wrote the book, not just from what I see, but from what I experience myself, the importance of unplugging. And I think we'll probably learn more about that as time goes on. There definitely are health impacts, and we see one thing I say in my classes is, we used to think of, when I started yoga, as the low back and the knees being the most vulnerable areas, the areas that were most vulnerable to injury. In the modern population, repetitive stress injuries, so shoulders, neck, wrists have definitely become also a high risk area. Even in my regular yoga classes that I teach in a yoga studio, often there'll be people, there are people just as likely to have wrist problems and have trouble being on their hands and knees as they are to have knee problems or be there for low back issues. So that's a change for sure.
It's interesting because I think that, definitely yogasana practice has grown out of an agrarian tradition. People use their bodies differently when those practices are being developed, and even at the turn of the 20th century, which is when modern yoga asana practice kind of started to evolve and stuff, right? And now we're entering a technological age, and our bodies are dealing with technology, so we use our bodies different, and it's interesting how I think the practice will reflect that as well.
That's a really good point, actually. When yoga developed, certainly we weren't sitting in chairs all day and in offices all day, and we are going to have to evolve our practice. And if I can bring it back to the purpose of practice, I think we want to use our practice to support where we are. And it's easy to get into the mindset of I should be doing a certain type of practice, or I should be doing these poses, but really I think your practice is there to support you, ideally, and you're not supposed to be serving it. And I have this colleague, Barbara Papini, who teaches she teaches prenatal yoga, but she also teaches workshops in teaching prenatal yoga. And she says this brilliant thing. There's yoga for your pregnancy, there's yoga to support your pregnancy, or there's yoga in spite of your pregnancy. And I think that applies to everything. And, I do have people come to my classes who are pregnant, and they, when you have a long time practice and it's a really big part of your life, it's hard not to be attached to it. It's hard to let go of it. And I totally get that, but it's also important to listen to your body, and it's kind of hard to understand listening to your body versus attachment and ego, and those are things that come with a more mature practice. But it's not just about prenatal yoga, but anything, knee injuries, or I sit in an office all day and I need to be working with that, or whatever it is that you're dealing with, from physical to emotional. There's yoga in spite of depression, or there's yoga to support depression, for example, and those are two different approaches. And so I'd like to see yoga going more in that direction of maybe individual prescriptions and much more, I guess the term is consumer education, although that,
It's very technical. I've kind of used that a couple of times, and I've kind of been like, what form would consumer education take? What exactly would it look like? That's a whole other conversation. We'll it
is a whole other conversation. So, how do we disseminate that information? That's a bigger topic for sure. But
we'll cover that on our next
issue. Of yoga being something that can be individually tailored to support you with whatever you're working on any level.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me again, Sandy. And And where can people find you? And can you just remind us of the titles of your books, and which I think kind of tie into the approach that you've talked about here around prevention and yoga as a practice support where we are in life. So your website, please, and your books.
Oh, thank you for asking. It's sandyblaine.com where you can find my workshop schedule. I do have some workshops coming up outside of the Bay Area in the next few months. And my books are Yoga for Healthy Knees and Yoga for Computer Users. So,
like us.
and like everyone now.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you so much. Bye.